Welcome, my soft-thinking listener. You've found yourself in the company of the sleepy sloth once again. A slow, scientifically minded fellow, who enjoys facts about ancient strategic board games, and things that time has gently folded into quiet history. I must tell you something before we begin. Today, I consider myself a scientist in ancient games of strategy. A scientist who is almost always correct, except for those few times when I am not. But even then, I prefer to drift gently onward, rather than fuss over it. Because what truly matters is the information itself. Before I start, please, let me know. What is the most boring thing you would secretly love hearing about? Let me know gently, in the comments. Now, let us begin today's episode of Ancient Strategic Board Games. Let us float gently onward to the distant sands of 3000 BCE, where the game of Senet first emerged in ancient Egypt. Senet is considered one of the earliest known games with strategic elements, although no one asked for this. And yet, here we are, admiring a board carved from wood or stone, often consisting of 30 squares arranged in 3 rows of 10. The game pieces, sometimes represented by small pebbles or carved tokens, move according to throws of sticks or bones that act somewhat like dice, although not quite. Senet was not merely a game but also had spiritual significance, representing the soul's journey through the afterlife. Its rules, however, remain a bit of a mystery, preserved only through archaeological remains and faint hints in hieroglyphs. The subtle art of moving pieces across that grid, with the faintest hint of strategy, marks a slow beginning in human attempts to shape chance and choice. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Senet boards have been found buried in tombs, which suggests that the game was a comforting companion in the quiet realms beyond life, a gentle pastime in places where time itself might feel quite endless. Now, as the slow river of time carries us forward to approximately 2500 BC, we meet the royal game of yore, originating from ancient Mesopotamia. This game, carved meticulously from shell and lapis lazuli, combines the thrill of racing pieces with strategic choices about movement and blocking opponents. The board itself, a curious arrangement of 20 squares forming a kind of T-shape, is designed for 2 players to move their pieces from start to finish, guided by throws of tetrahedral dice. Unlike Senet, the royal game of yore's rules are better understood, thanks to cuneiform tablets discovered in the mid-20th century. Players aimed to navigate their pieces safely while obstructing the other, a dance of risk and patience. This early mingling of chance and strategy demonstrates humanity's slow but steady fascination with control, competition, and thoughtful movement. Let us drift, ever so slowly, now to 2000 BCE, where across the vast lands of ancient China, a game called Go was introduced. Go, or Weiqi as it is known in Chinese, is a territory control game, profoundly simple in appearance but endlessly deep in strategy. The board is a grid of 19 by 19 lines, where 2 players alternately place black or white stones, aiming to surround larger areas than their opponent. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, marveling at a game that can stretch for hours or even days, where every stone placed gently influences the sprawling tapestry of control. Go's beauty lies in its elegant rules and the quiet tension between expansion and defense, a meditation in black and white dots on a wooden board, evoking the soft whisper of balance and patience. Next, we float softly to about 1500 BCE, where early forms of Mancala began to spread across Africa and the Middle East. Mancala games involve sowing and capturing seeds or small stones in rows of pits dug into wooden boards or the earth itself. The number of pits, seeds, and capturing rules vary greatly, but the essential rhythm remains the same: counting, sowing, capturing, and outwitting the opponent through careful planning. This game is quietly meditative, a gentle mechanical pulse that echoes the cycles of nature and harvest. It invites slow thinking, patience, and the kind of repetitive motion that soothes the mind, like counting leaves falling softly in the breeze. And now, let us glide onward to around 600 BCE in India, where chaturanga was developed. This game is the venerable ancestor of chess, a battlefield simulation involving pieces that represent infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots, each moving in its own prescribed way. The board resembles the modern chessboard, an 8x8 grid, though the rules differ somewhat and include dice for movement determination. Chaturanga's quiet complexity was designed to teach battlefield strategy and tactics, a slow and thoughtful rehearsal of war on a checkerboard plane. The piece's movements mimic ancient armies' maneuvers, and the slow unfolding of the game reveals layered strategies of attack, defense, and sacrifice. No one asked for this. And yet, here it is, preserved in dusty manuscripts and the patient minds of players long gone. Finally, we drift to approximately 500 BCE in ancient Greece, where Petia took shape as a tactical capture and territory control game. Petia, sometimes called the game of pebbles, involved players moving pieces to capture opponents by surrounding them, akin to an early form of Go or checkers. The rules were simple, the strategy subtle, and the game likely served as a mental exercise in planning and foresight. It is fascinating how this modest pastime echoes through time, influencing many European games to come. Petia's gentle rhythm of placement and capture reflects the slow and steady march of strategy as a human pursuit, quietly bridging centuries and cultures. Ludus Latrunculorum, a strategic game beloved in ancient Rome around 100 CE, invites us into a world of slow-moving tactics and patient planning. This game, sometimes called simply Latrunculi, which translates roughly to the game of mercenaries or little soldiers, was designed to simulate the very careful maneuvers of a battlefield. Imagine, if you will, a board, a grid of squares, often 8x8 or sometimes larger, upon which small pieces, representing soldiers, are placed and moved with deliberate caution. The objective, to capture the opponent's pieces by surrounding them on two opposite sides, a quiet echo of real military encirclement. The rules themselves are mostly reconstructed from fragments of Roman writings and archaeological finds, which means that even now, the details drift softly in shadows and half-understood clues. This fact is not exciting. Not even a little bit. And that is just perfect. The slow unfolding of each player's move resembles the gentle shifting of moss on a stone, a thoughtful, deliberate dance rather than a hurried battle. Players would think deeply, considering each step like a small, careful breath taken in a shaded forest. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. The exact rules of Ludus Latrunculorum may have varied, as the game was popular over many centuries, evolving in subtle ways, much like a slowly turning gear in a grand clock, its mechanism softly changing shape over time. Let us float gently onward to 600 CE in India, where early chess rules began to find their first formal structure. The game known as chaturanga, already a centuries-old pastime, saw refinement in how its pieces moved and interacted on the board. This period marked a crucial moment in the evolution of chess, as the slow codification of rules aimed to balance strategy and complexity. Picture the game's pieces: infantrymen moving one square forward, elephants bounding diagonally, horses leaping with curious patterns, and chariots racing along rows and columns. The king, or Raja, moved cautiously, its safety paramount, while the other pieces performed their intricate dances across the checkered battlefield. This was not a rush, it was a slow, meditative engagement, much like watching a feather fall through the still air. The subtle distinction in piece movements, shaped carefully over time, allowed the game to blossom into a true mental exercise of strategy and foresight. The formalization of these rules helped the game spread steadily, carrying with it the soft rhythm of thought and anticipation. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, reflecting on these quiet moves that eventually led to the chess we know today. Moving softly along the winding path of history to about 700 CE, chess reached Persia, where it was known as shatranj. The game underwent gentle transformation, introducing new rules and piece names that still echo in the modern game. The rook, or rook, the fares, or horse, and the fil, or elephant, each held distinct roles on the board, while the king remained the steadfast center of attention. Shatranj's rules, slightly different from its Indian predecessor, included the concept of check and checkmate, terms that have since entered everyday language, though their meanings remain steeped in quiet calculation and cautious play. This period saw the slow evolution of strategic depth, as players learned to anticipate opponents' moves several steps ahead, like the slow rotation of a gear wheel turning beneath soft moss. The game's spread through Persia contributed to its further diffusion into the Islamic world and eventually Europe, each culture adding layers of subtlety. The pieces' movements, the board's layout, and the turn-taking all formed a calm, deliberate structure that invites endless contemplation. Let us drift, ever so slowly, through these early centuries of chess's quiet growth. Let us float gently onward to the year 900 CE, when the game of Go, already ancient and cherished in China, crossed the sea to Japan. In its new home, Go gained profound cultural significance, intertwined with philosophy, art, and the very essence of strategy itself. The board, a vast grid of 19 by 19 lines, held the promise of quiet complexity, where each black or white stone placed softly altered the unfolding pattern of territory and influence. The game's simplicity in rules, placing stones to surround territory, capturing stones by completely surrounding them, belies an unfathomable depth, like the gentle layering of fallen leaves in a forest, each layer revealing new mysteries as time drifts on. Go's slow, meditative pace encourages players to think in broad, sweeping terms while attending to minute details, balancing aggression and defense with a patient hand. It is a game where silence speaks volumes, and the space between stones is as meaningful as the stones themselves. This diffusion to Japan allowed Go to blossom into a cultural practice enveloped in ceremony and study, a slow unfolding of wisdom. No one asked for this. And yet, here it is, a game that quietly teaches patience and the beauty of soft, strategic thought. Turning gently to 1100 CE, chess took another step in its evolution, now blooming in Europe with new pieces and movements that shifted the game's tempo. The queen, once a timid counselor, gained the power to move any number of squares diagonally, horizontally, or vertically, becoming the most dynamic piece on the board. The bishop, too, evolved, moving diagonally across the board, adding new strategic possibilities. These changes transformed chess into a faster, more fluid game, though its essence remained a careful, measured contest of wits. The introduction of these pieces brought fresh layers of complexity, much like the slow turning of interlocking gears beneath a weathered clock face, each tooth carefully crafted to mesh with the next. Players now balanced aggressive tactics with patient defense, contemplating long-term strategies while adjusting to new opportunities. This period of innovation reflects the cultural and intellectual exchanges of medieval Europe, where ideas moved as slowly and surely as the drip of rain soaking into moss-covered stone. The game grew richer, yet retained its quiet dignity as a mental battlefield. In the softer light of 1200 CE, early variants of Mancala were documented in East Africa, highlighting the spread and diversification of strategic gameplay. Mancala, with its simple mechanics of sowing and capturing seeds or stones across a series of pits, has a humble and ancient charm. The game's many regional variants reveal subtle differences in the number of pits, the rules for capturing, and the rhythm of play, like variations in the gentle patterns of ripples across a still pond. The act of counting seeds, deciding where to place each one, and anticipating an opponent's next move offers a soothing repetition, a slow mechanical motion that lulls the mind into a gentle trance. This spreading of Mancala in East Africa illustrates how simple tools of strategy can adapt and flourish in diverse cultural soils, much like moss spreading softly over rocks in a shaded forest. The game invites not hurried victories but slow, thoughtful progress, a meditation on cycles and balance, perfectly suited to quiet moments when the world feels still and unchanging. Let us drift, ever so slowly, within these small worlds of seeds and stones, where the simplest actions contain hidden depths. Nard, the ancient ancestor of backgammon, quietly took shape in Persia around 1300 CE. This game, known in some regions as nard or nardshire, wove together the gentle randomness of dice rolls with the slow, deliberate planning of strategic piece movement. Imagine a board divided into 24 narrow triangles, called points, arranged in 4 quadrants, upon which players shift their 15 small tokens in a dance dictated partly by chance, partly by intention. Each roll of 2 dice whispers possibilities of movement, softly opening or closing paths for each player's tokens to traverse the board's path, a journey of careful risk and cautious advance. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the dice themselves were not always the familiar cubic shapes we see today. In some Persian versions, elongated or slightly rounded dice were used, each face delicately carved or painted. This mingling of unpredictability and strategy in nard laid the groundwork for what would become modern backgammon, a game loved for its balanced tension between fate and foresight. As the slow turning of gears in an ancient clock marks the passage of time with soft certainty, so too does nard embody the gentle rhythm of decision-making punctuated by chance. Players would sit, slowly calculating moves, their fingers resting lightly on the smooth pieces, their minds weaving through a forest of possibilities as quiet as falling leaves. Let us float gently onward to the year 1400 CE in Japan, where shogi, a chess variant with its own quiet soul, was introduced. Known sometimes as Japanese chess, shogi shares the familiar checkered battlefield but offers a unique twist that encourages prolonged thought and strategy, the ability to redeploy captured pieces back onto the board as one's own. This rule, subtle and profound, turns every capture into a gentle promise of future possibilities. Pieces are flat and pentagonal, typically made from polished wood, their kanji inscriptions softly etched in black or gold ink, giving them a quiet, austere beauty. The board is a grid of 9 by 9 squares, larger than the European chessboard, inviting longer, more intricate campaigns of thought. The game's flow is slow and measured, a soft meditation on control, loss, and recovery, much like a feather drifting down to settle on a mossy stone. Each move is deliberate, each redeployment a careful choice, weaving complex patterns of threat and defense that unfold over hours of play. No one asked for this. And yet, here it is, a game of thoughtful balance and soft complexity that has delighted many for centuries, gently shaping minds in quiet contemplation. Turning our attention to Europe in the 1500s, the introduction of tarot cards as a medium for gaming quietly enriched the world of strategic play. Beyond their mystical reputation, tarot cards initially appeared as tools for trick-taking games, where players carefully navigated suits and trump cards to outmaneuver their opponents. These decks typically contained 78 cards, divided into the major arcana and minor arcana, the latter resembling the playing cards familiar today. The strategic elements lie in anticipating opponents' moves and managing the distribution of cards, requiring a slow, steady focus akin to watching a slow-moving shadow trace across a sunlit forest floor. The artwork on the cards, rich with allegorical and symbolic imagery, added an extra layer of quiet fascination, but it is the game itself that holds our attention here, a dance of memory, probability, and tactical foresight. This early use of tarot for gaming laid a foundation for complex card games to come, marrying chance and strategy in a manner as soft and compelling as the turn of a slowly winding gear. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, many of these games required a deep understanding of card hierarchy and the subtle ways in which certain cards could change the flow of play, demanding quiet, thoughtful engagement from players who often sat for long, undisturbed sessions. Around the 1600s, dice games began to gain popularity in Europe, increasingly incorporating elements of strategic betting. These games, simple in appearance but rich in possibility, combined the unpredictability of dice rolls with the slow, deliberate art of wagering and bluffing. Imagine a small circle of players, each quietly calculating odds and deciding whether to risk a few coins on the uncertain outcome of a roll, a gentle game of chance laced with quiet strategy. The dice used were usually cubic, made from bone or ivory, their faces meticulously marked with pips from 1 to 6. Popular variants included games where players could choose to raise bets or fold, introducing a layer of psychological subtlety that slowly drew players into a dance of patience and quiet risk. The rhythm of play was unhurried, punctuated by the soft clatter of dice on wooden tables and the hushed murmurs of calculated decisions. This blending of chance and strategy created an experience where nothing rushed forward but instead unfolded like a moss-covered path through a shadowed forest, winding gently through possibilities and risks. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, pondering the subtle allure of these early betting games that set the stage for centuries of strategic gambling to follow. Now, let us float gently onward to the 1700s, when the game of the goose emerged in Europe as an early example of a race game peppered with strategic decision points. This game, often played on ornate boards featuring a spiral track of numbered spaces, invited players to move their tokens based on dice rolls, aiming to be the first to reach the end of the path. But beyond simple chance, the game of the goose contained spaces with special effects, some advancing the player, others setting them back, requiring thoughtful navigation and mild strategic choices. The design of the board itself was often richly decorated, depicting geese, hazards, and allegorical images that softly engaged the imagination as players progressed. Its mechanics are straightforward, yet the interplay of luck and choice creates a slow-moving tension, like watching fog drift over a quiet lake. The game spread across Europe, becoming a favored pastime for families and nobility alike, its gentle mix of chance and strategy echoing the rhythms of life's own unpredictable course. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, some versions of the game included penalty spaces where players might be forced to miss turns or move backward, adding a quiet complexity to the otherwise simple race. Let us drift, ever so slowly, to around 1750 CE, when European chess rules began to standardize, giving rise to the modern game as recognized in tournaments today. This period witnessed the formalization of how each piece moved and interacted on the board, codifying rules that balanced tradition with clarity. The queen's newfound powers, the bishop's diagonal reach, and the standardized moves of the rook and knight settled into a quiet harmony, creating a game both dynamic and thoughtful. Tournaments emerged, slowly shaping chess into a disciplined contest of intellect and patience, where players studied openings, middle games, and endgames with the quiet rigor of scholars poring over ancient manuscripts. The chessboard, with its 64 squares, became a stage for slow, deliberate battles of wits, where every move invited deep reflection and calm calculation. The subtle shifts in play echo the turning of clockwork mechanisms, each cog contributing to a grand, measured rhythm. No one asked for this. And yet, here it is, a timeless contest of strategy that continues to unfold gently with each match played around the world. Let us float gently onward to 1780 CE in France, where the publication of Le Jeu de la Guerre quietly introduced one of the earliest written sets of war game rules. Authored by the Marquis de Fouquiers, this text laid out a methodical approach to simulating battlefield tactics through a board game. The game employed a grid-based map, miniature units representing infantry, cavalry, and artillery, and rules that governed movement, combat, and terrain effects with meticulous detail. This slow, studious work allowed players to engage with the complexities of warfare without the chaos of real battle, inviting careful thought and planning akin to a sloth's deliberate, measured pace. The rules emphasized logistics, unit formation, and the timing of attacks, creating a rich tapestry of strategic considerations that could occupy minds for hours. The text itself was dense and precise, reflecting the Enlightenment's spirit of order and reason. This early wargame influenced future military simulations and the development of modern strategy games, all unfolding in a quiet progression, like a slowly turning gear beneath the moss-covered surface of history. No one asked for this. And yet, here it is, a detailed manual for peaceful war, where contemplation replaces conflict and patience becomes the greatest weapon. In the gentle warmth of 1800 CE, the game known today as Ludo quietly began its slow journey, emerging from the deeper roots of the Indian game Pachisi. This soft transformation took place not all at once, but through gradual simplification, a gentle stream branching from a wider river. Pachisi, played with cowrie shells and cloth boards shaped like a cross, was once a royal pastime, full of layered strategy, partnership, and ceremonial movement. In time, Ludo appeared as a smaller, neater version, with simplified rules and a square board, ideal for home play and gentle family evenings. 4 players, each guiding 4 tokens around a board, would roll a single die, waiting patiently for the right number to enter or move, slowly racing toward the safety of their colored home column. The strategic heart remains, choosing which piece to move, when to block, and when to risk exposure. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. In its earliest commercial forms, Ludo was patented in England in 1896 under the name Ludo by Alfred Collier, though its mechanics whisper far older echoes from ancient Indian courts and outdoor verandas shaded from the sun. This simplified version, with its rhythmic turns and steady, predictable rules, invites a kind of relaxed focus, a soft competition perfect for moments when the world moves just a little too quickly, and a board, a die, and a few colorful pieces offered just enough to hold the mind in a drowsy, pleasing balance. Drifting ahead to 1824, we find ourselves in the early whispers of timed gameplay, as chess clocks made their first documented appearance, though at this point, they were more conceptual than mechanical, more idea than ticking object. In the beginning, time was measured not by individual clocks, but with shared sandglasses or agreed-upon durations. Players would gently track the passage of moments, ensuring that no one thinker, however thoughtful, held the game too long in their embrace. The earliest true chess clocks, dual mechanisms, one pausing as the other begins, would come later, in the mid-1800s. Yet the 1820s marked the first time the notion of measured thought entered the conversation around strategy games. This shift brought a kind of gentle urgency, a soft metronome beneath the surface of every move, encouraging players to balance deep thought with timely decisions. Let us float gently onward. For this extra interesting fact. It wouldn't be until the 1880s that mechanical toggle clocks became standard, and even later before digital ones joined the slow ballet of competitive chess. These clocks, whether ticking softly or flashing subtly in digital form, remain a sleepy little guardian of pace, guiding games not with harsh alarm, but with the quiet promise that every turn must one day end, like the soft dimming of twilight at day's close. Now let us step, ever so slowly, into 1850 Prussia, where a game called Kriegsspiel emerged, not from a parlor, but from the minds of military officers seeking to study, not to play. Kriegsspiel, literally war game, was developed as a detailed simulation tool, allowing Prussian officers to reenact battlefield scenarios on carefully gridded maps using miniature units, rulers, and charts. It is often regarded as the first modern war game, complete with fog of war mechanics, umpires, and rules governing movement, terrain, and combat resolution. This was not a game of speed or excitement, but of deep calculation, slow decision trees, and gently unfolding outcomes based on probability and logistics. Officers would not merely move pieces, they would issue orders, wait for resolution, and see their strategies interpreted through the impartial logic of rulebooks and referees. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Kriegsspiel included opaque elements where players could not see all the information their opponent possessed, introducing uncertainty, a quiet tension that mirrored real military command. These early exercises laid the sleepy groundwork for nearly every strategic war simulation to follow. In Kriegsspiel, we find the roots of both playful and professional simulation, where every gentle shuffle of a unit across a paper map echoes with the soft steps of imagined boots and long shadows drawn over silent battlefields. Drifting softly into the year 1873, we arrive at something curious and quietly revolutionary, the publication of The Landlord's Game by Lizzie Magie, a woman whose soft voice in the world of games carried the weight of economic critique. This early board game was not designed for mere diversion, it was intended as a slow, educational meditation on property ownership, rent, and monopolies. Players moved around a square board, purchasing land, building homes, and collecting rent. The structure echoed the future game of Monopoly, but its heart beat with a different rhythm, one of fairness, balance, and reflection on economic inequality. Lizzie Magie, inspired by the teachings of Henry George, envisioned her game as a tool to gently awaken awareness of how unchecked land accumulation could lead to societal harm. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Magie created two versions of the game, one where wealth concentrated through monopolies, and one where profits were shared equally, allowing players to experience, quietly and firsthand, the consequences of different systems. The Landlord's Game meandered through circles of progressive thinkers and educators, sowing its ideas slowly over time. Though not immediately widespread, it planted seeds that would later be reshaped, commercialized, and, quite softly, reshuffled into the game known today across the world. And yet, at its core, it remains a patient, pondering exploration of economy, layered in cardboard and ink. 2 gentle years later, in 1883, Lizzie Magie patented The Landlord's Game, solidifying her soft but firm belief that games could be both recreational and enlightening. With patent number 748,626, she protected not just the mechanics of play, but the educational spirit behind it. This moment marks one of the earliest instances of a game designed with explicit socio-economic intention being formally recognized. The board, the deeds, the rules, each piece a quiet symbol in Maggie's effort to awaken minds through play. Her intention was not to provoke, but to stir, softly, a sense of inquiry. What does it mean to own land? What happens when rent becomes power? Her patent described these ideas with slow, deliberate clarity. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Despite her patent and her innovation, Maggie's name drifted almost into obscurity as others later repackaged and commercialized her game, changing not just the rules, but the meaning. Yet her creation remains, humming quietly beneath the surface of every colorful property card and cardboard house. In this simple act of protection and invention, Lizzie Magie became one of the earliest architects of games with purpose. And her soft legacy still echoes, like the slow turning of paper pages in a sunlit room. Now, we drift gently toward 1890, where the game of checkers, also called drafts, began to settle into standardized rules across Europe and the Americas. This game of diagonal leaps and quiet captures had existed in various forms for centuries, from ancient Egypt's Albuquerque to medieval French adaptations. But in the late 19th century, organizations and publications sought to unify the rules, creating a gentle consensus around how many squares the board should hold, typically 64, how pieces should move, diagonally, one step at a time and less jumping, and when promotions occurred, typically when reaching the far row. This slow harmonization allowed for fair competition and tournament play, where minds met in deliberate symmetry, each player watching, waiting, and leaping only when the time was right. But first, a soft and patient detour. For this extra interesting fact. The king piece in checkers gains its strength not through violence, but through elevation, a second token stacked atop it, like a quiet crown of earned distinction. With each slide and jump, each cautious approach or forced retreat, checkers teaches stillness and foresight. It remains a favorite around the world, not because it is loud or quick, but because its elegance is quiet, and its lessons, like all the best ones, unfold slowly. In the closing years of the 19th century, precisely in 1896, a game called Halma tiptoed into existence, its name derived from the ancient Greek word for jump. Created by George Howard Monks, an American thoracic surgeon with a fondness for structured thought, Halma is a board game that encourages the movement of tokens across a square field, using single steps or long, leaping chains of jumps. Players begin in one corner, their goal, to guide all their pieces to the opposite side of the board. There is no capture, no conflict, just movement, quiet and persistent. The board, often 16 by 16 squares, or sometimes smaller, creates a space of calm geometry where strategy lies not in conquest but in coordination. Let us float gently onward. For this extra interesting fact. Halma was originally designed for 2 or 4 players, but over time, its layout and concept inspired the creation of Chinese checkers, a version played on a star-shaped board, which, despite its name, was neither Chinese in origin nor closely related to checkers. Halma, in its purest form, invites a slow unraveling of possibilities, where jumps echo like soft footsteps across a tiled floor, and progress is measured not in triumph, but in graceful transitions. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, warmed by the slow and silent joy of pieces hopping toward distant corners, one quiet move at a time. In the quiet threshold of 1900, nestled in an age of mechanical marvels and velvet-draped parlors, a curious game of concealed armies stirred into existence, what we now recognize as the early form of Stratego. Though its most familiar edition would not grace game store shelves until decades later, its essence, hidden identities, bluffing, and cautious maneuvering, traced a more shadowy lineage through European military games such as L'Attaque, patented in France in 1908. Still, the foundational whispers of Stratego were already drifting in the air. A game not of brute strength, but of unknowns. In this game of calm confrontation, each player commands an army arranged in secret. No piece is what it seems. A lowly scout might dart forward or a high-ranking marshal might lie in ambush. Bombs are motionless threats. The flag, silent and unmoving, waits, buried behind layers of protection. Victory comes not from domination, but from deduction. The slow peeling back of uncertainty, like turning over fallen leaves to see what wriggles beneath. Let us float gently onward. For this extra interesting fact. While many associate Stratego's popular form with the Dutch company Jumbo in the 1940s and 1950s, it was truly the spirit of earlier turn-of-the-century military-themed games that shaped its roots. These games whispered of battlefield logic softened by human guessing, and of war games played not with blood, but with memory. Stratego is not loud. It unfolds like a fog. It invites players to listen to the silence between the moves. By the turn of 1903, under the thoughtful care of Milton Bradley, already known for bringing visual harmony to American classrooms, a peculiar board game gained new attention. Known as the checkered game of life, it was a patterned walk through existence itself. The game didn't just simulate dice rolls and turns. It sought to fold the concept of life, choices, values, risks, into squares and spinners. Originally designed in 1860, this version began drifting toward what we now call the game of life, a game that lets you journey from cradle to retirement with all the charming unpredictability of a dream. Players didn't conquer territories or build empires. Instead, they passed through moments, education, jobs, marriage, even the occasional scandalous pitfall. Strategic choice met chance at every corner, softened by the rounded click of the spinner wheel. In this blend of gentle randomness and life-stage strategy, a narrative would bloom uniquely for each player, an unfolding of cardboard destiny. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, while Milton Bradley held the original idea, it was later revived and transformed in 1960 by Reuben Klamer to match a more modern vision of American life, complete with cars, plastic peg people, and soft suburban dreams. Still, the 1903 stirrings mark a poignant moment, when a game asked not how to win a war, but how to live a life, step by delicate step. A board that cradles every stage. In cardboard echoes of time's soft passage. Around the gently glowing year of 1910, a star-shaped board made its quiet debut into drawing rooms and parlors, a six-pointed constellation of movement known today as Chinese checkers. Despite its name, the game bore no true connection to China, nor to traditional checkers. Instead, it was a peaceful descendant of the earlier American game Halma, designed in the 1880s. This reimagined version, shaped into a symmetrical star, invited players to race their marbles across the board, not in haste, but in a steady sequence of thoughtful hops. Up to 6 travelers could journey across the same field, each with a home corner and a goal, to reach the far side. Players could leap, sometimes chaining moves in a satisfying rhythm of motion, like a raindrop rolling along petals. There was no capturing, no elimination. Just a slow, shared passage across a geometric landscape, where patience felt like a virtue built into the board itself. Let us drift, ever so softly, toward this extra interesting fact. The first editions of Chinese checkers were sold under various names, including Hopching checkers, by the Pressman Company in the United States. Its popularity grew not through conquest, but through accessibility, simple to learn, and endlessly soothing in its repetition. Though its origins were American and its lineage European, the soft rhythm of the game captured imaginations worldwide, turning strategy into something almost meditative. In the gently humming humdrum of 1913, a salesman named Charles Darrow found himself unemployed, but full of quiet ideas. Though he is often credited as the creator of Monopoly, the deeper truth is more winding. Darrow encountered the landlord's game, originally invented by Lizzie Magie in 1904 to highlight the dangers of monopolistic economics. He added illustrations, tokens, and charm, and soon, the game evolved into a competitive ritual of real estate, rent, and risk, where strategy coiled itself around every dollar. Players begin modestly, circling the board with hopes of building houses, charging rent, and cornering property groups. Railroads, utilities, income tax, it is a soft echo of capitalism painted in pastel and plastic. But beneath its cheerful colors lies a slowly tightening loop. A game where bankruptcies gather like clouds and fortunes tilt like scales on the breeze. But before we drift on, a soft little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Darrow's version caught the attention of Parker Brothers in 1935, and from there, it traveled the globe, bringing economic tension to kitchen tables for generations. Though Maggie's original message may have faded, the game endures as a lesson, sometimes playful, sometimes pointed, on ownership, wealth, and the strange, circling path of chance and control. In Monopoly, strategy is patient. And so is ruin. In the soft-edged year of 1924, amidst the slow swirl of incense and the hush of courtyard shadows, Mahjong began to take shape, not as a singular invention from one pair of hands, but as a collective crystallization of ancient influences, regional rules, and centuries of gameplay. Though its roots stretch further back, this year marks a moment of consolidation. When the game as we recognize it today gained clarity and form and spread across China with purpose. Played with 144 intricately marked tiles, often made of bone and bamboo, Mahjong is not just a game, it is a symphony of suits and sequences, of winds and dragons, of strategies woven beneath the surface of chance. The 4 players, like seasons at a table, draw and discard in rhythms both serene and suspenseful. There is no board, no battlefield, only the smooth click of tiles and the soft patterns they suggest. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Mahjong became so beloved across China that even as political tides shifted and eras ended, it remained a constant presence. Its name, meaning sparrow, may come from the chattering sound of tiles being shuffled, a tiny echo of wings in motion. And as it drifted outward, carried by travelers and immigrants, the game transformed again. American Mahjong took on new rules, new scoring, new voices. Yet its spirit remained the same, a contemplative dance of logic and luck, played slowly under lantern light. When the year 1930 settled in, like a map unrolled at dusk, a game called La Conquête du Monde, the conquest of the world, was quietly conceived by a French filmmaker with a taste for global dreaming, Albert Lamorisse. Though he would later become known for poetic films like The Red Balloon, it was this strategic board game that first captured his mind, imagining a world carved into territories, trembling with armies and alliances. The game would later be renamed Risk, and by the time Parker Brothers introduced it to the United States in 1959, it had already become something larger than a pastime. It was a blueprint for imaginary conquest. Players took turns deploying troops, rolling dice, and capturing continents, their strategies unfolding like ink across parchment. And yet, Risk was never truly about war. Not in the loud or chaotic sense. It was about balance. About timing. About knowing when to retreat. Let us float gently onward. For this extra interesting fact, though dice drive the battles, the most enduring strategies in Risk are rooted in diplomacy, forming temporary alliances, bluffing opponents, or waiting patiently in Australia till the time is right. There is an odd poetry to watching a global map shift beneath plastic pieces, one quiet turn at a time. And though it simulates domination, Risk teaches restraint, revealing, softly, that every empire can fall as swiftly as it rose. In 1932, as the world swayed between silence and invention, Alfred Mosher Butts, a quiet architect with a fascination for patterns, crafted something that didn't conquer land or build empires, but built something softer. And perhaps more enduring, words. With careful hands and a thoughtful mind, he combined the structure of crossword puzzles with the mathematical logic of letter frequency, and thus created the blueprint for a game called Lexico, which would eventually become Scrabble. Each letter tile, assigned a point value based on how often it appears in English, became not just a symbol, but a currency of creativity. The game invited players to build from nothing, to look at random letters and, with slow consideration, arrange them into meaning. A gentle competition where strategy met vocabulary. But first, a soft and patient detour. For this extra interesting fact, Butts initially tried to sell his invention to major game manufacturers, only to face rejection after rejection. It wasn't until years later, when James Bruno took up the idea and renamed it Scrabble, that it began to catch on, quietly, at first, then all at once. Now found in libraries, homes, and sunlit retirement centers across the globe, Scrabble has become a calm battlefield of minds, where every seven-letter word feels like a whispered triumph. It is a game of silence and surprise, where strategy hides behind every vowel. Just 3 quiet years later, in 1935, a different kind of strategy emerged, one without dice, without chance, without even a board at first. It was the early version of a game that would later be known as diplomacy, developed slowly in the thoughtful mind of Alan B. Calhamer. As a young man, Calhamer had studied European history and borders, specifically, the diplomatic tangle of pre-World War I alliances. Inspired by maps, treaties, and the brittle trust between empires, he imagined a game in which negotiation was everything. No dice were needed. No luck. Only words. Only plans. And only the fragile strength of promises made. And broken. In diplomacy, players represent major European powers, making secret orders and forging alliances behind the scenes. Each move is revealed simultaneously, often turning friends into foes. Let us drift gently onward. For this extra interesting fact, John F. Kennedy and Henry Kissinger were both reported to be admirers of diplomacy, drawn to its simulation of real-world power play. The game is famously unforgiving, with betrayal not just possible, but inevitable. Yet it is never rushed. Games can last hours, days, even weeks, with every whispered pact carrying the weight of potential collapse. In this still, suspended realm, diplomacy invites players to practice the slow, careful art of trust, and the quiet readiness to sever it. In the hushed mid-war year of 1944, while the world outside buzzed with uncertainty, a different kind of economy unfolded on tabletops, a market without noise, where companies formed and shares shifted in silence. Acquire, later published by 3M in 1964 but originally conceived during this earlier decade, was the creation of Sid Sackson, a game designer who believed in strategy rooted in growth and calculation. Set in a fictional corporate landscape, Acquire invites players to build hotel chains, invest in stocks, and merge companies to create larger empires. There are no dice, no battlefields, only grids, tiles, and the slow ripple of financial strategy. A game where silence speaks louder than luck. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Acquire was one of the first successful games to simulate the stock market in an accessible and abstract way, bringing business logic into the realm of play. Its release as part of 3M's Bookshelf Games series, designed to look like dignified hardcover books, cemented its reputation as a game for thinkers, planners, and patient tacticians. Each tile placed is a quiet investment. Each merger is a calculated breath. In the world of Acquire, the loudest moves happen softly, behind the scenes, in boardroom shadows and rising ledgers. It remains a favorite among strategy enthusiasts who appreciate its calm tension, its elegant pacing, and its insistence that every success is built, one tile at a time, with careful thought and quiet risk. In the soft quiet of 1947, a game already forming in the background of living rooms and lexicons began to rise into view. Scrabble, once a modest creation of Alfred Mosher Butts, was given new life by James Bruneau, who polished the rules, named it anew, and released it into the world with delicate hope. Letters, once scattered in casual speech and unremarkable usage, now carried the weight of strategy, each tile a decision, each word a quiet declaration. Players pulled from velvet pouches and peered at racks like poets composing on an unseen stage. It is not the longest words that win, but the ones placed with foresight, where triple word scores sparkle like tiny constellations in cardboard space. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Scrabble's sudden rise was aided by a quiet moment of serendipity. The president of Macy's, on vacation, discovered the game, brought it to his shelves, and watched as demand blossomed. By the early 1950s, it had become a staple, not of war or economics, but of language itself. And so it remains, humming with potential syllables, where every Q without a U is a soft victory, and every 7-letter word feels like unearthing treasure in the attic of the alphabet. Just 3 years later, in 1950, a new shape emerged from the mist, neither wordy nor worldly, but connected in a different way. Twixt, designed by Alex Randolph, took the simplest of ideas, a path from one side of the board to the other, and invited players to find beauty in barriers. Pegs marked positions. Links form delicate bridges. But no connection may cross another, creating a tension both spatial and strategic. The board is not a battlefield, but a garden of intent, where every move must grow with caution. Played on a grid where vertical and horizontal pegs mark players' edges, Twixt becomes a gentle dance of approach and prevention, like ivy seeking light while respecting its neighbor's climb. Let us float gently onward. For this extra interesting fact, although it never gained the widespread fame of its louder cousins, Twixt has long been beloved by those who appreciate abstract strategy, games that speak in silence, without armies or economies, only the quiet logic of shape and space. It remains a soft favorite among thoughtful minds, where victory arrives not with fanfare, but with a final, gentle link completing a path unseen until it was done. In the slowly shifting air of 1954, an earlier seedling of diplomacy blossomed again, now in fuller form. First designed in the 1950s and refined over years, diplomacy stepped away from dice, from cards, from luck altogether, and focused instead on whispers, alliances, and the fragile art of trust. Set in pre-World War I Europe, the board shows nations poised for expansion, yet the real terrain lies between conversations. Players write secret orders. They make promises. They break them. There are no random numbers to hide behind, only the choices made, the friendships forged, the quiet stabs in twilight. Unlike other games, diplomacy requires time, patience, and an almost theatrical dedication to role and rhythm. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Among its admirers was a young John F. Kennedy, who is said to have found its lessons of power and persuasion eerily resonant. In this slow-moving symphony of betrayal and brilliance, there are no armies stronger than well-timed silence and no defeat as soft and bitter as a friend's broken pact. Even now, in quiet corners of weekend gatherings, diplomacy stretches over long hours and longer stares, reminding all who play that strategy is not always about numbers, it is about knowing when to speak and when to watch. Then came 1958, a year with gears gently beginning to turn behind the curtain. Avalon Hill, a company founded by Charles S. Roberts, was born not from the toy aisle, but from a vision, one that saw wargaming as something richer than simple conquest. With the release of Tactics, and soon after, Gettysburg, Avalon Hill didn't merely sell games, they published experiences. Hexagonal maps. Rulebooks like novellas. Scenarios filled with dates and divisions. Players weren't just moving units, they were reliving history, replaying it, understanding its weight through measured decisions. Let us pause for this extra interesting fact. Avalon Hill was one of the very first to introduce the idea of the gaming hobby, including complex simulations, player communities, and rules errata, all concepts now foundational to modern strategy games. It wasn't loud. It wasn't mass market. But it was deep. And in that depth, a generation of tacticians, historians, and dreamers found something they didn't even know they were looking for. In a time of noise and novelty, Avalon Hill quietly laid the foundation for thoughtful play, where every counter moved was a lesson in history, and every page of rules was an invitation to think a little longer. As the clock turned softly to 1960, something familiar returned, but now more polished, more accessible, and ready to march across tabletops everywhere. Though first conceived in the 1950s, it was in this year that the commercial edition of Risk, adapted from Albert Lamrous's original French creation La Conquête du Monde, spread across the world like one of its own fictional empires. The premise was simple, yet infinite, a world map, armies placed with care, dice rolling like distant thunder. Territories changed hands. Continents were secured. Cards stacked in anticipation. It was war distilled, not bloody, but brisk. Not realistic, but resonant. Yet beneath the luck of battle lay a deeper pulse, when to strike, when to hold, when to trust the silence. But first, a quiet detour. For this extra interesting fact. Risk became one of the very first board games to emphasize global conquest with a blend of probability and planning, and it helped popularize the area control genre, now a core element in modern strategy design. Players returned to it night after night, not for novelty, but for familiarity, for the comfort of maps and miniatures, where control was just one good plan away. Its colors are faded now, its pieces perhaps chipped, but the game remains, like an old atlas on a shelf, still ready to open and begin again. And in 1965, when the world was shifting through science, space, and social change, another kind of universe arrived on a board. Cosmic Encounter, created by a group of designers including Bill Eberle, Jack Kittredge, and Peter Alotka, broke the rules by breaking all the rules. No player was the same. No power was static. Each alien species came with strange abilities. Some could cheat, some could reverse turns, some could even win in unconventional ways. And still, it all worked, barely, brilliantly, bizarrely. The game didn't reward consistency, but chaos managed. Players did not just adapt to one another, they evolved, bent, flexed around cosmic logic. Let us drift, ever so gently, for this extra interesting fact. Cosmic Encounter was one of the first games to introduce the idea of variable player powers, a mechanic now used across genres from card games to digital worlds. But it did so not with noise, but with wonder. Stars on the box. Planets to colonize. Negotiations and flares and sudden reversals. It was not a map of Earth this time, but of possibility. And even today, its galaxies remain open, waiting for the next group of dreamers to choose a color, pick a planet, and see what strange futures unfold. Let us drift now into the soft folds of the 1970s and early 1980s, where strategies grew more elaborate, and imagination stretched across mystical maps, modular tiles, and curious decks of cards. In the quietly adventurous year of 1971, something softly revolutionary began to stir. Dungeons and Dragons, often whispered into the air as simply D&D, tiptoed into basements, back rooms, and tabletop gatherings. Created by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, this game wasn't about winning. Not in any traditional sense. It was about becoming a wizard, a rogue, a cleric, or a simple fighter with a name and a destiny etched in pencil. With grid-lined maps and polyhedral dice that tumbled like fate made tangible, players wandered through handcrafted worlds where strategy blended with storytelling. Tactical combat played out on squares and hexes, but the true game was happening in the minds and voices of its players. Choices mattered: how you planned, how you acted, how you negotiated with goblins or avoided cursed doors. But first, a soft little detour. For this extra interesting fact. D&D wasn't just a game, it became the quiet architecture of the role-playing genre, inspiring not just board games, but entire genres of video games, novels, and collective imagination. Its rules have changed, its additions evolved, but its core has remained gently intact, a shared illusion built on rules, strategy, and softly whispered what-ifs. It didn't just simulate combat. It simulated a world. And it welcomed all who wished to step softly into it. By 1974, while the fantasy realms of roleplay were blooming, another seed was quietly being planted in the form of a prototype that would become Magic, the Gathering. But before it had a name, before mana was tapped and creatures summoned, mathematician Richard Garfield was pondering a challenge: could a strategic game be portable, endlessly variable, and collectible? This concept would take root and grow slowly, until its eventual public unveiling in 1993, but here, in the dreamlike spaces of 1974, its embryonic ideas began to swirl. It was a game that would fuse logic and luck, strategy and serendipity. Each card, like a secret key, could unlock new tactics or thwart another's plan. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Though Magic, the Gathering is credited with launching the collectible card game industry, its earliest form was designed for players waiting between rounds at game conventions, a filler game, intended to be brief. Instead, it became a genre-defining force, echoing softly in every foil booster pack and carefully built deck. But here, in the mid-70s haze, it was still just an idea, strategic, shimmering, and quietly waiting. That same year, in 1974, the strategic game of Stratego was given a modern rebirth. Though its roots trace back through older European military games and even Napoleonic traditions, this edition polished and codified its elements into the now familiar form, a battlefield of hidden ranks, careful positioning, and quiet deduction. Each piece had a role, from lowly scouts to the formidable marshal, and the all-important flag sat quietly, waiting to be found, or protected at all costs. Players did not merely march. They guessed, they bluffed, they hoped, often moving a lowly miner with deceptive confidence, hoping their opponent might mistake it for something more dangerous. But first, a slow and curious detour. For this extra interesting fact. Unlike chess or checkers, Stratego cloaks its pieces in anonymity, offering a battlefield not of known strength, but of masked intent. It rewards intuition just as much as memory. In this dance of misinformation, every move echoes like a soft footfall on a foggy field, each player straining to sense the shape of a hidden army through silence alone. Now we drift softly into 1976, where the board game Life, originally created by Milton Bradley in the 19th century and then redesigned, found its way into households with fresh vibrancy. This updated version, filled with little cars, pink and blue pegs, and spinner wheels, wasn't merely a game of luck. It was a slow simulation of choices, with a hint of strategy folded into the pastel-colored lanes of college or career, house or apartment, risk or security. As players meandered down winding roads of plastic, the game asked not just what you would roll, but who you might become, an artist with a modest salary, a doctor with loans, a parent with twins unexpectedly added to the car. But first, let us pause for a soft little detour. For this extra interesting fact. The original version of the Game of Life in 1860 bore almost no resemblance to the cheerful version most know today. It was moralistic, focusing on virtue and vice. Only in the 20th century did it shift toward gentle satire of suburban aspiration, with strategy interwoven between spins. It became a time capsule, a soft mirror held up to society's dreams, and a gentle exercise in imagining alternate paths, all paved in pastel. And then, as we turn toward 1980, the faint outlines of a walled medieval city begin to emerge. Though the final form of Carcassonne would not solidify until 2000, its early design echoes can be traced back to this year, when Klaus-Jürgen Riedy began exploring ideas of tile placement, area control, and evolving landscapes. Carcassonne is not merely about laying tiles. It's about choosing where and when, deciding whether to extend a road, complete a city, or delay, watching the landscape shift slowly like weathered stone under moss. The strategic tension lies not in conflict, but in completion. In seeing the potential of a space before it's fully formed. But first, a patient little detour. For this extra interesting fact. The inspiration for the game's medieval theme came from the fortified French town of Carcassonne, with its turrets, stonework, and encircling walls. Riedy, influenced by the quiet architecture and unfolding possibilities, began laying the groundwork for what would become one of the most beloved tile-laying strategy games of the modern era. These early thoughts, like the first tiles of a grand mosaic, shaped a future game that would bloom slowly, one square at a time. And so, with our minds still nestled in tile-laid kingdoms and pastel roads of life, we drift ever onward, into new territories of historical conquest, river-fed civilizations, and gentle trains gliding softly across imagined landscapes. In 1982, a new kind of battlefield was unboxed. One that spanned oceans and continents, factories and front lines. This was Axis and AMP, Allies, a sprawling World War II simulation that invited players to assume the roles of great powers, commanding fleets, air squadrons, and infantry across a grand, global map. Unlike many games before it, this was no brief skirmish, it was a long, deliberate unfolding of war economies, coordinated assaults, and quiet planning behind lines. The board shimmered with strategic promise, as each move carried echoes of history reshaped by the hands of friends and foes. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Axis and AMP, Allies is often credited with helping define the genre of grand strategy board games, where economic planning is as vital as military might. Designed by Larry Harris and later adopted by Milton Bradley, the game balanced luck with layered decision-making, an early blend of war game precision and accessible play. For many, it became a gentle introduction to larger, more complex simulations, planting seeds that would grow into even more intricate strategic titles in years to come. Then, in the soft intellectual murmurings of 1984, a prototype began to take form, a design that would eventually blossom into Tigris and AMP, Euphrates, a game of rivers, kingdoms, and delicate balance. Designed by Reiner Knizia, this strategic gem would quietly teach that strength often lies in harmony, and that conflict, though sometimes inevitable, could be resolved through clever positioning rather than brute force. In this abstract world, players placed leaders, built monuments, and expanded civilizations across a land both fertile and contested. The game rewards foresight, adaptation, and subtle dominance in 4 distinct spheres of influence: religion, farming, commerce, and government. But first, a soft little detour. For this extra interesting fact. The genius of Tigris and AMP, Euphrates lies not in its complexity alone, but in its quiet balance. The winner is not the one with the most of everything, but the one whose lowest score among the 4 domains is highest. It's a game that encourages not overreach, but elegant equilibrium, like a river finding its course between stone and silt. Though published in 1997, its roots began much earlier, with development shaping slowly through the 1980s, mirroring the rise and fall of the very civilizations it asks you to guide. As we continue to drift, we find ourselves in the gentle currents of 1987, when the contours of what we now call Eurogames began to emerge. These were not games of elimination or wild randomness. They were quiet, thoughtful puzzles, focused on resource management, structured turns, and gentle competition. Though no single title defines the moment, this period saw the arrival of games like Die Masche and 1830, each contributing threads to the tapestry of the genre. These Eurogames moved away from direct conflict and embraced a kind of polite rivalry, where the tension arose not from destruction, but from optimization. But first, a slow and winding detour. For this extra interesting fact. Eurogames often feature what designers call low-luck mechanics, systems that minimize random chance and instead emphasize planning, strategy, and trade-offs. Popularized in Germany, particularly during the late 80s and early 90s, these games would form the philosophical foundation for titles like Catan, Carcassonne, and Puerto Rico. Their quiet power comes not from drama, but from design, rules that fold gently around the player, asking not who can conquer, but who can adapt with elegance and care. In 1990, a schoolteacher and amateur designer named Klaus Teuber began shaping a prototype in his home near Darmstadt, Germany. It was a game of hexes, of sheep and wood and quiet little trades, a game not about war or wealth, but about building something together. This humble prototype would become Catan, though at first, it was simply a design where settlers expanded into unknown terrain, guided by dice, trade, and the slow rhythm of resource generation. Teuber tested and retested, trying to find balance between randomness and strategy, between chance and negotiation. But first, a soft and gentle detour. For this extra interesting fact. The original name was Settlers of Catan, and it reflected not conquest but cooperation. Players could block each other, yes, but success came from trading, from sharing, from understanding what your neighbor needed and what you could offer in return. It was a game where resources were not just currency, but conversation. And that prototype, scribbled on homemade tiles and shuffled across kitchen tables, would soon change the world of board games forever. Then, In 1995, that vision was fully realized. Catan, published by Cosmos in Germany, was released into the world like a soft breeze catching in sails. And it spread. Not all at once, but steadily, like a settlement growing one road at a time. It introduced new players to a different kind of strategy, one not based on domination or secrecy, but on interaction and planning. There was still luck, in the roll of the dice, but the game gently encouraged negotiation, clever building, and adapting to what the island gave you. The hex-based modular board changed each time, offering new puzzles and possibilities. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Catan won the prestigious Spiel des Jahres in its debut year, becoming a symbol of the Eurogame Renaissance. Its popularity helped transform board games from childhood pastimes into thoughtful social experiences for all ages. It asked players not can you win, but can you thrive, collaborate, and adjust? And in doing so, it quietly taught the world a softer kind of strategy, one of farms, forests, and friendly bartering. And now, as the gears of time carry us gently forward to 1997, we find ourselves boarding an elegant train. Ticket to Ride, though not released until 2004, began its conceptual journey here. Designer Alan R. Moon had long dreamed of creating a game about railroads, not the heavy economic simulations of older train games, but something simpler, more welcoming, more about the journey than the industry behind it. In this early period, he began sketching out ideas that would soon evolve into a softly competitive route-building game. Players would claim colored tracks, connect distant cities, and race, quietly, politely, to complete secret destinations. But first, let us take a soft little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Ticket to Ride would later win the 2004 Spiel des Jahres, introducing millions to the idea that strategy could be as gentle as laying down tracks, one turn at a time. Its visual clarity, ease of play, and satisfying decisions made it a modern classic, but its soul was born earlier, in the quiet spaces of the late 1990s, when the dream of crossing a continent by train first began to take shape. One card, one route, one city at a time. Somewhere between winding pastures and softly flickering lamps, our journey continues. Along quiet tiles, global struggles, and sunlit farms where meeples gently toil. In 1998, a golden-hued game took form under the Caribbean sun, Puerto Rico, a strategy experience where players didn't battle with armies, but with crops, shipping routes, and clever timing. Designed by Andreas Seyfarth, this game placed its heart not in conflict, but in economic finesse. Each turn, players chose roles: builder, captain, settler, trader, each offering a unique benefit, not just to the chooser, but to all. The secret? Choosing not what you need, but what denies your opponents. It was a dance of plantations, production chains, and timely exports, where sugarcane and coffee became quiet engines of victory. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Puerto Rico became one of the highest-ranked games on Board Game Geek for over a decade, praised for its replayability and deep, but accessible, decision-making. Yet, in the gentle pauses between moves, a shadow remains. Discussions continue about its historical framing, as players manage plantations in a colonial setting without direct acknowledgement of slavery. It remains a landmark of game design, but also a soft invitation to think more deeply about the stories embedded in our play. As the clock rolled gently into the year 2000, the air took on a chill, a global breath held in uncertainty. And from that air emerged Pandemic, a game unlike the others. Here, players were not rivals, but teammates, working side by side, racing against a spreading tide of disease. Designed by Matt Leacock, it introduced cooperative strategy to a wide audience. The board showed a world map dotted with outbreaks, infection cubes, and cities on the edge of collapse. Players were specialists, scientists, medics, researchers, each gifted with a special skill to help heal the world. But first, a soft little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Pandemic was one of the earliest mass-market cooperative board games to achieve global success. It rewrote the expectation that board games had to pit player against player. Instead, it asked, can you save the world together? Its timing mechanics and escalating difficulty created suspense, but always with the glimmer of hope, a cure just a few cards away. Over time, it blossomed into expansions, legacy formats, and countless quiet moments where players held their breath, hoping the next outbreak would not come. Then, in 2001, the land itself began to unfold beneath our fingertips. Carcassonne, named after the medieval walled city in France, brought with it the gentle rhythm of tile placement. Players drew from a stack, one tile at a time, and shaped a pastoral landscape of cities, roads, cloisters, and fields. It was slow, almost meditative, like watching vines grow or streams meander. Designed by Klaus-Jürgen Riedi, it introduced the world to the simplicity of elegant spatial decisions. Each tile had rules, but the possibilities felt endless. Would you help your opponent finish a city? Or block their road with a twist of countryside? But first, a winding detour. For this extra interesting fact, Carcassonne helped popularize the meeple, those charming, human-shaped wooden figures that have since wandered into hundreds of games. The base game was followed by a cascade of expansions, adding inns, cathedrals, traders, dragons, each a new breeze through the hills and halls of Carcassonne. It remains one of the most peaceful and strategic ways to spend an afternoon, building a map, one tile at a time. Like patching together a dream. By 2002, the colors of the board turned to grayscale. A map divided not by rivers or roads, but by ideology and invisible lines. This was the world of Twilight Struggle, a game of the Cold War, of spies, coups, influence, and soft power. Designed by Ananda Gupta and Jason Matthews, it drew from the language of historical events and tension-laced headlines. Each player assumed the role of a superpower, the United States or the Soviet Union. Each turn brought decisions carved from actual events, Bay of Pigs, Berlin blockade, Vietnam, space races, and proxy wars. But first, a soft detour. For this extra interesting fact, Twilight Struggle is what's known as a card-driven game, where historical event cards serve as both opportunities and double-edged swords, often helping your opponent if you use them unwisely. For years, it held the #1 ranking on Board Game Geek, praised for its precision, depth, and the way it captured the slow burn of global rivalry. Every action on the map shifted influence subtly, like cold winds over mountain passes. It wasn't a game of explosions, but of balance, brinkmanship, and quiet, trembling nerves. And then, as the seasons turned softly into 2003, a patch of land awaited its farmers. Agricola arrived, not with fanfare, but with a soft rustle of fields needing tending. Designed by Uwe Rosenberg, it introduced many to the idea of worker placement, where players assigned family members to gather wood, build fences, sow grain, or care for livestock. But this wasn't a cheerful, easy harvest. Each round pressed players to feed their growing families, or suffer the sting of begging cards. The game was tight, tense, but somehow warm. Like managing a real-life garden in uncertain weather. But first, a thoughtful little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Agricola allowed for deep personalization. Players could upgrade their homes, learn new occupations, build ovens or wells, and see their farms transform into little stories of survival and progress. With over 300 cards in its advanced deck, no two games ever felt quite the same. It's not just a game, it's a poem about scarcity, about nurturing what you have, and about planning one turn ahead while keeping your eye on the winter to come. By 2004, the air hummed with the low electrical buzz of cities growing, grids expanding, and power flowing through invisible wires. Power Grid, or Funkenschlag as it was first known in its German edition, brought energy infrastructure to the tabletop. Players competed not to conquer land, but to supply it, to build networks of cities, acquire power plants, and manage volatile fuel markets. Designed by Friedemann Fries, the game was deeply economic, yet tactile. Players bid on auctions, mapped out connections, and calculated efficiencies with pencil-sharp precision. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Power Grid uses a dynamic market where fuel prices rise and fall based on demand, teaching supply and demand principles through game mechanics. Players must adapt to a shifting landscape where coal becomes scarce, nuclear options emerge, and cities expand in quiet competition. It rewards those who think ahead, but not too far ahead, lest they forget the flickering balance between growth and sustainability. Like managing a glowing constellation of urban life, it asks not just how to win, but how to light the way with care. In the soft glow of 2005, a new wonder emerged in the realm of strategy games, one built not from sprawling boards or armies, but from the delicate art of card drafting. 7 Wonders gently invited players to guide ancient civilizations through the ages, weaving threads of science, commerce, military, and culture. Designed by Antoine Balsa, this game unfolded over 3 distinct ages, each presenting new cards that players would select, passing the rest softly along like whispered secrets. The goal was not conquest alone, but the careful construction of a flourishing city, where every decision rippled across the fabric of development. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, 7 Wonders introduced the elegant mechanism of simultaneous play, where all players select cards at the same time, reducing wait times and creating a quiet rhythm of selection and anticipation. This balance of speed and depth made it a gentle favorite in both casual and competitive circles, its art and design capturing the feel of sunlit scrolls and ancient marketplaces. Its expansions would later add layers of complexity, but at its heart lies a serene dance of choices, where civilization grows not through haste, but through careful, thoughtful planning. Not far behind, in 2007, the world of card games saw a soft revolution with the release of Dominion, a creation of Donald X. Vaccarino. Unlike traditional card games that relied on fixed decks, Dominion introduced the deck-building mechanic, where players started with a modest hand of cards and gradually added new, more powerful ones by purchasing them from a communal pool. Each card added was like a note in a quiet symphony of strategy, shaping the pace and flow of play. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the beauty of Dominion lies in its modular setup, with a selection of kingdom cards chosen anew each game. No 2 playthroughs felt quite the same, encouraging exploration and gentle mastery. It was a game about accumulation, balance, and timing, building your deck as if tending a small garden of possibilities, pruning and nurturing toward victory. Its influence rippled through the industry, inspiring countless deck-building games to follow, each one a soft whisper of strategic innovation. In the hush of 2008, the meadows and factories of an alternate 1920s Europe were brought to life by Scythe, designed by Jamie Stegmaier and published by Stonemaier Games. This game combined area control, engine building, and resource management into a slow-burning strategic masterpiece. Players took on the roles of faction leaders, each with unique abilities, guiding their workers and mighty mechanical mechs across a fractured landscape. The quiet clank of gears turning and fields tilled forms the backdrop to a world where economics and warfare intertwine without haste or fury. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Scythe is notable for its balance of conflict and peaceful development. Players may never have to fight directly to win, but the looming presence of armies influences every decision. Its richly illustrated board and detailed miniatures invite players into a tactile, immersive experience, like slowly uncovering an old, intricately painted map folded beneath a mossy stone. The game's rhythm rewards patient builders who nurture their economies and positions over many thoughtful turns. In 2009, the world of asymmetric card games took a shadowed turn with the introduction of Android, Netrunner, a two-player experience designed by Richard Garfield. Set in a cyberpunk future, it pitched one player as a powerful corporation guarding secrets behind firewalls, while the other played as a rebellious hacker, probing defenses and seeking to expose hidden agendas. The game's deep strategy lay in its tension between offense and defense, bluff and calculation. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Android, Netrunner was a reboot of the 1996 Netrunner game, reimagined with a rich narrative and refined mechanics that captured the cat-and-mouse dynamics of cyber warfare. Players built decks representing vastly different approaches, one subtle and reactive, the other aggressive and cunning. The game's asymmetric nature made each side feel distinct, yet balanced, a quiet conversation between two minds and a slow dance of anticipation and counterplay. Though it found a devoted niche audience, it remained a jewel of strategic card gaming, its intricate mechanics unfolding like the slow flicker of neon lights in a rainy cityscape. Then, in 2010, the cooperative genre deepened with the release of Pandemic Legacy, a game designed by Rob Daviau and Matt Leacock that added a narrative arc to the original Pandemic experience. Players again faced the relentless spread of disease, but this time, each play session permanently altered the game board, rules, and components. This evolving story created a series of quiet yet impactful surprises, where decisions carried weight across multiple sessions. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Pandemic Legacy introduced the concept of legacy gameplay to the masses, where players open sealed packets, place stickers, and modify cards in ways that transform the game permanently. This innovation blended strategy with storytelling, creating a shared journey marked by gradual change, challenges, and bittersweet victories. It's a game that asks players to embrace uncertainty and collaboration, not just in one sitting, but across time, making every choice a soft footprint on a path that unfolds slowly, like pages turning in a well-loved book. As the calendar softly marked 2011, a realm of fantasy and intricate strategy blossomed with the introduction of Terra Mystica. Crafted by Jens Drogemuller and Helga Osterdig, this game invited players to command one of 14 unique factions, each with distinct abilities and landscapes to terraform. The goal was not only to expand but to transform the world itself, turning hostile terrain into fertile ground for settlement and growth. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Terra Mystica is renowned for its complex interaction of area control, resource management, and economic engine building, all wrapped in a thematic fantasy shell. The game's depth encourages players to think many moves ahead, balancing expansion with the delicate costs of terraforming. It's a world where every decision feels weighty yet measured, like tracing patterns in soft sand beneath a twilight sky. Its polished mechanics and rich components have earned it a place among the modern classics, inviting gentle strategists to immerse themselves in quiet conquest and patient transformation. In the gentle turning of the year 2012, a game called Kingdom Builder quietly took root, inviting players into a world where territory stretched like soft blankets of earth beneath wandering feet. Designed by Donald X. Vaccarino, who also brought us Dominion, Kingdom Builder revolves around placing settlements strategically across varying landscapes, fields, deserts, forests, and mountains, each shaping how and where players might grow their dominion. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. The game's unique feature lies in its modular board and ever-changing Kingdom Builder cards, which alter scoring conditions each playthrough, creating gentle waves of variability that keep strategy fresh yet soothingly familiar. Unlike games of direct conflict, Kingdom Builder offers a quieter kind of competition, one where placement and foresight gently ripple through the game's quiet lands, rewarding those who see not just the immediate step, but the subtle shaping of the future. Each settlement feels like a pebble dropped in a still pond, its influence expanding in delicate circles. It is a game of subtle power, patience, and whispered expansion. The following year, 2013, stirred a storm of myth and legend with the release of Blood Rage, a Viking-themed area control and card drafting game created by Eric M. Lang. Here, players command clans of fierce warriors vying for glory before Ragnarok, the end of days in Norse mythology. But instead of frantic battle cries, the game unfolds with measured, deliberate turns where players draft cards to upgrade their clan's abilities, summon mythical creatures, or pillage quiet villages. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Blood Rage's card drafting mechanic invites players to quietly choose not only what benefits them, but what they might deny to others, a soft undercurrent of strategy beneath the roaring sagas. The beautifully illustrated miniatures and boards are like paintings come to life, yet the gameplay encourages a thoughtful pace, where every clash is as much about timing and positioning as about raw force. Beneath the thunderous theme lies a serene strategic dance, a slow march toward inevitable destiny, where honor and fate intertwine like fog rolling over fjords. By 2014, the world of words found a new resting place in Codenames, a team-based strategic word association game designed by BFYDAFTFAT. Players split into two teams, each trying to uncover their secret agents hidden among a grid of words, guided by a single cryptic clue from their spymaster. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the beauty of Codenames lies in its balance between connection and ambiguity. The spymaster's clues must softly weave threads linking multiple words, like faint footprints in a vast forest of meaning. The game is less about quickness and more about contemplation, where teams gather in hushed tones, feeling out the possibilities and gently probing for insight. Its simple setup belies a deep interplay of language, intuition, and patience, inviting players to savor the slow unfolding of understanding. It became a favorite for casual gatherings, a gentle intellectual lullaby where words float softly on the breeze of thought, never rushed, always lingering. The quiet rise of deck-building games around 2015 marked a soft expansion of a mechanic that had nestled into the strategic gaming heart over the previous decade. While Dominion had sown the seeds, the following years saw an ever-growing garden of deck builders, each offering new twists on accumulating cards, combos, and tactical choices. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, this era saw deck building blend with diverse themes, from dungeon crawling to political intrigue, allowing players to curate their own personalized libraries of strategy. Unlike the high-tempo shuffle of some card games, deck builders often ask players to think several moves ahead, quietly calculating which cards to add and when to prune, like tending a bonsai tree with meticulous care. The genre's popularity blossomed slowly but steadily, as more designers embraced the delicate balance between randomness and control, offering players a softly layered experience where the joy is in the unfolding possibilities rather than immediate victory. In 2016, a jewel of pattern and color emerged in the form of Azul, a tile drafting and pattern building strategy game designed by Michael Kiesling. Inspired by the decorative azulejos tiles of Portuguese palaces, players took turns selecting tiles from shared factories to adorn their own mosaic walls. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Azul invites a meditative rhythm. Players must plan their selections to avoid penalties for unused tiles while striving for harmonious, repeating patterns. The game's tactile nature, the cool, smooth tiles sliding across the table, adds to its gentle allure, much like arranging delicate feathers or sorting soft stones in a quiet stream. Its elegant simplicity combined with subtle depth brought it widespread acclaim, allowing players to lose themselves in the slow, satisfying act of creation. Azul is less about conquest and more about beauty, balance, and the quiet joy of crafting order from chaos, one tile at a time. 2 years later, in 2017, the sprawling saga of Gloomhaven began, a tactical combat and campaign strategy game by Isaac Childers that invited players to wander dark dungeons and shifting landscapes across multiple sessions. Here, a group of adventurers moved slowly but purposefully through quests, each choice rippling through an evolving story and shaping future encounters. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. Gloomhaven's hallmark lies in its blend of tactical card play and legacy-style progression. Players select cards to perform actions and attacks, but must carefully manage their limited resources, akin to a slow dance with fate and fortune. Its massive box holds a labyrinth of scenarios, characters, and items, making each campaign a long, unfolding narrative, less a sprint, more a steady, measured trek through shadowed woods and winding paths. For those who appreciate patient, layered strategy, Gloomhaven offers a quiet refuge, a place to lose oneself slowly in adventure's embrace, where every whispered choice shapes the tale to come. In the quiet unfolding of 2018, a game called Root arrived gently onto the strategic gaming landscape, created by Cole Werrell and published by Letter Games. This asymmetric, faction-based warfare game invited players into a forest alive with conflict, where each faction, be it the crafty Woodland Alliance, the industrious Marquise de Cat, the elusive Vagabond, or the cunning Eerie Dynasties, wove its own distinct path to victory. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. Root's design masterfully balances these varied factions, offering each player a uniquely paced and textured experience, like different creatures moving through the dappled shade of a mossy forest floor. The asymmetry requires players to not only master their own faction's peculiarities but to anticipate the slow, unfolding strategies of others, much like listening to the quiet rustling of leaves signaling unseen footsteps. Its richly illustrated components and woodland theme lend the game a soft, immersive atmosphere, perfect for those who enjoy strategy with a whisper of story and a hint of wilderness mystery. The year 2019 saw the gentle expansion of digital strategy board games, as online platforms began to softly open doors to new realms of connection and play. With many classic and modern titles becoming accessible through digital apps and websites, the slow pace of thoughtful gaming found a wider audience. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. The digital transformation allowed for asynchronous play. Players could make moves in their own time, creating a relaxed rhythm that fit quietly into daily life, like the gradual turning of clock gears in a sunlit study. The rise of virtual tabletop platforms also provided tools for automation of complex rules and statistics, removing the burden of bookkeeping and allowing players to drift deeper into strategy and story. This era nurtured the delicate balance between human patience and digital convenience, weaving new patterns in the long tapestry of strategic gameplay. Innovation continued gently in 2020, as asymmetric strategy games, those where players take on unique roles with differing objectives, began to gain soft traction among designers and players alike. This shift allowed for richer narratives and more varied strategic landscapes, as games expanded beyond symmetrical competition into realms where each player's journey was distinct. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. This trend echoes the slow embrace of complexity over uniformity, inviting players to explore not just common goals but personalized, quietly unfolding stories. These games often require players to balance cooperation and competition delicately, like a troupe of dancers moving at different tempos but in harmony. The growth of asymmetric designs enriches the strategic garden with a variety of plants, each requiring its own kind of care and attention. In the soft glow of 2021, the crew took flight, offering a cooperative trick-taking game designed by Thomas Singh. Here, players embarked on space missions, communicating through limited clues to complete shared objectives, a gentle twist on the classic card game formula. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. The crew's brilliance lies in its subtle communication restrictions, requiring players to carefully read each other's intentions while navigating the quiet tension of incomplete information. This cooperative framework fosters a sense of shared purpose and slow discovery, as teammates align their moves to reach common goals amidst the vast silence of space. Its minimalist components and elegant mechanics create a soothing flow, perfect for those who cherish the slow unfolding of trust and strategy. By 2022, the strategic landscape welcomed Cascadia, a puzzle and territory-building game designed by Randy Flynn. Players took turns drafting habitat tiles and wildlife tokens, placing them to create harmonious ecosystems across the Pacific Northwest's landscapes. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Cascadia marries spatial reasoning with gentle ecological themes, encouraging players to find balance and flow in their tile placements, like stones arranged carefully along a mossy stream. The interplay between habitat shapes and animal scoring patterns invites a contemplative pace, rewarding those who move thoughtfully and patiently. Its soothing artwork and tactile components enhance the meditative quality, making it a serene experience where strategy feels like a quiet walk through a forest of soft colors and gentle sounds. The dawn of 2023 witnessed advances in AI opponents for board games, where digital minds began to challenge human players with increasing strategic subtlety. Developers focused on creating opponents that could mimic thoughtful playstyles, adapting to human tactics with patience rather than haste. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. These AI systems often use machine learning to study vast databases of games, allowing them to respond not just quickly but with a kind of quiet intuition, like a slow thinker who watches and waits before acting. This technology enriches solo and online play, providing a reliable and calming strategic partner for those who prefer the gentle solitude of thoughtful gameplay. The progress in AI invites a soft companionship, bridging human and machine in a shared, unhurried dance of moves and counter-moves. And in the gentle unfolding of 2024, the integration of augmented reality, AR, into strategic board games began to bloom, offering new immersive experiences where digital overlays and physical components entwine softly. Players might watch pieces animate under their fingertips or witness shifting landscapes unfold atop their tabletops, blending the tactile with the virtual. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. AR's promise lies not in overwhelming the senses but in enhancing the quiet magic of games, allowing strategy to bloom in richer layers, much like the way morning mist reveals hidden details on mossy bark. This technology invites players to explore familiar games anew, adding a delicate shimmer of enchantment without rushing the slow, thoughtful rhythms that define strategic play. It is a soft awakening of possibilities, where the old and the new fold together like petals in a slow, unfolding bloom. As we drift toward the end of our journey through these ancient strategic board games, remember that you need not remember any of these details. The facts float away like moss on a still pond, soothing rather than stimulating. If your mind wanders, if your thoughts drift to soft feathers or slow turning gears, then that is perfectly fine. There is no need to hold on tightly to these facts. Let them settle gently, like a soft sigh in a quiet room. If your eyes are closed, if your thoughts are drifting, then my job here is done for today. Thank you for spending this unremarkable moment with me. You have listened to The Sleepy Sloth, where uninteresting things become the softest lullabies.